Whether you're going for a coffee chat or a first round interview, you can expect to be asked the following question: walk me through a DCF. The key is to first provide a high level overview and then to follow up with the details as they prompt you. We've broken it down into 6 simple steps that you can follow when you're asked this question. So first, project out the free cash flows for 5 to 10 years depending on the stability of the company. Then discount these cash flows at an appropriate risk-adjusted rate. After this, you determine the terminal value of the company, assuming that the company does not stop operating after the projection period. You discount this terminal value to account for the time value of money. You sum up these two, so the cash flows from the projection period and the terminal value, and this gives you the enterprise value. You subtract out net debt, which gives you the equity value, and you divide by the number of diluted shares outstanding, which gives you the implied share price. Keep in mind that the whole point of this exercise is to determine how much a share of the company should be worth. So basically, if the company is publicly traded and you see that it's trading at $30, but you think but you do a DCF and it turns out that according to your calculations it should be $50, you can see the company is undervalued. Here you can find the 6 steps I've just mentioned. So make sure to pause the video and to memorize these, because this is really the sort of level that you should be giving as a first response. And it makes sense to just learn this by heart. Don't name WACC, don't name CAPM at this stage, just really stay high level. This is really key. And they're then going to sort of prompt you on different areas. Because this is a really wide area, we're going to first focus on WACC in this video. We're going to make other videos covering aspects like how to determine the terminal value. So the follow-up question you would get would be, which discount rate do you use to discount the cash flows and the terminal value? So what you use is the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. The WACC is calculated as the cost of equity times the amount of equity in the capital structure plus the after-tax cost of debt times the amount of debt in the capital structure. And a really common question you'll get after this is, how do you determine the cost of equity? And the cost of equity is calculated using the CAPM, the capital asset pricing model. And the formula is that it's the risk-free rate plus the levered beta times the equity risk premium. Now the risk-free rate, it's the AAA rated government or risk-free part of a government bond. It should have a maturity matching the length of the projects financed by the company so that there's no reinvestment risk, and it should match the currency of your free cash flows. In practice, you use the 10-year government bond. If you're in the US, a source to find this is the Wall Street Journal, which is published at the top, and you can find it very easily. But assuming if you're in a different country, if you're for instance in the UK, you'd use the UK government bond. If you're in Germany, you'd use the Bund. So it should match the area where the company is located. The beta measures the exposure of the company to systemic risk, but this is quite a large topic, so we're going to make a separate video on beta. The equity risk premium should be the expected excess return required associated with holding the market portfolio over the risk-free rate. And Damodaran, who's a professor, publishes the equity risk premium for different countries, and I'm going to put a link in the description because it's a really useful resource and used by practitioners. So another question you might get is, how do you determine the capital structure? So how do you determine the weights for the equity value and for the value of the debt? And so there's several options based on if you're using the current capital structure or if you're using the target capital structure. If you're using the current capital structure, your equity would be equal to the market capitalization or the result of your DCF calculations if it's a private company. If, on the other hand, you're using a target capital structure, then you would use the values from the company's management or from a target or a sector average. But if you're using the current capital structure, then it's quite easy. You just use the current beta. But if it's not, then you're going to have to relever the beta and adjust the cost of debt depending on this ratio. So in practice, you just use the market capitalization, which is the share price times the diluted shares outstanding. And for the value of debt, ideally you'd use the market value when it's listed, but in practice you use the book value unless the company is in distress, in which case the credit ratings would be impacted. Lastly, they might ask you, how do you determine the cost of debt? And the cost of debt, so the actual formula is the 10-year risk-free rate plus the credit spread, so above the 10-year rate, which corresponds to the rating of the company. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you should not just calculate the historical net interest expense divided by the average net debt or use a historical rate. This is completely wrong. You need to calculate the yield to maturity of all of the company's listed bonds with an ideal 10-year maturity to match the cost of equity calculation. Or you could use the yield to maturity of comparable company bonds with similar risks or similar credit rating. If in the previous steps you took the target capital structure instead of the current one, then you'd have to estimate the credit rating corresponding to the debt to equity ratio that you chose. And the reason why you use the after-tax cost of debt is to reflect the benefit that governments provide to companies through the tax deductibility of interest payments. And we don't include the benefit in the free cash flow calculations for the DCF, so we have to include it here. Thank you for watching, and make sure to comment if you've got any questions or suggestions.